Good evening, everyone. I'm Louise Mirror, President and CEO of the New York Historical Society, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this special virtual program, Memorials, Monuments, and Statues 2020, What to Remove, What to Preserve, and What to Build. This program is presented as a part of our Bernard and Irene Schwartz Distinguished Speakers series. I hope you're all healthy and safe as you watch the program this evening, and that you will take the opportunity to visit our new exhibition, Hope Wanted, which is now on view in our outdoor courtyard on West 76th Street. Tickets are available at nyhistory.org. I'd like to take just a moment to thank all of our trustees, members of our Chairman's Council, all of our members, and other donors for your great generosity. It is only through your ongoing support that we are able to continue making history matter. Now then, to our speakers. Alan C. Guelzo is a three-time winner of the Gilder Lehrman Lincoln Prize and the author of books on the Emancipation Proclamation, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and the Battle of Gettysburg. He serves as Senior Research Scholar in the Council of the Humanities and Director of the Initiative on Politics and Statesmanship in the James Madison Program at Princeton University. Brent Leggs is Executive Director of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. He's the author of Preserving African American Historic Places, and he has been a great champion of the preservation of African American cultural monuments like the A.G. Gaston Motel in Birmingham, Alabama. Edna Green Medford, I am very proud to say, is a New York Historical Trustee. She's also Associate Provost for Faculty Affairs, Professor of History, and former Chair of the History Department at Howard University, where she was also Interim Dean of Arts and Sciences. She's a specialist in African American and Civil War era history and the co-author of the Emancipation Proclamation, Three Views, and also Lincoln and Emancipation. Our moderator this evening is Harold Holzer, who is the author, co-author, or editor of more than 50 books on Lincoln and the Civil War era, including the Lincoln Image, the Confederate Image, and the Union Image, as well as his latest, The Presidents versus the Press. He's the winner of the Gilder Lehrman Lincoln Prize and the National Humanities Medal. He's also written a number of recent opinion pieces on 2020 statue controversies. Tonight's program will last about an hour, including 15 minutes for questions and answers. Your questions can be submitted via the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. In the interest of simplicity, we've disabled the chat function tonight, so please do remember to use the Q&A. Our speakers will get to as many questions as time allows. This evening's discussion will be recorded so that we can present it as an encore in the future. And now it is my great pleasure to turn the program over to Harold Holzer, our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise, and thanks to everyone at the Historical Society for all you're doing to keep public programming alive and vibrant during this period of social isolation. It really makes a difference. This summer has been marked by both social isolation and social unrest. And with the latter, a new reckoning, not only with racism and injustice, but with long accepted historical memory as well. And inevitably with many of the icons that have long towered over public squares in America to represent civic virtue. The debate over controversial public statuary, particularly those that venerate Confederate heroes, is not new. Here at the Historical Society, we've had 2 or 3 discussions on the issue, one with my friend Edna Medford, and it's an ongoing discussion, but as we know, much has happened in the last few months to take the issue kind of out of the realm of historians and panels alike. Government officials from New Orleans to Baltimore to Richmond to Chicago to New York have been removing contested statues. And in other places, north as well as south, demonstrators have scrawled messages on statue pedestals. and in some cases toppled marbles and bronzes, thrown some statues into rivers, and demanded that others be removed from view. So we thought this was a good moment to assess and appraise all of these recent developments, to provide some context and some comment, and weigh in about the future of how we regard the past. But because this is basically a talk about art, we thought we'd show some pictures to start. So if we can have the first slide, I'll quickly run through a litany of some of these contested memorials. And of course, the poster boy for contested statuary in the old Confederacy is this towering equestrian portrait of Robert E. Lee at the start of Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. The governor of Virginia has already suggested that this statue will come down. In the next slide, you'll see one on Monument Avenue that has come down, not officially, but by demonstrators. It's the statue of Jefferson Davis on that same stretch of Monument Avenue in Richmond. The controversy is not just about Confederate monuments. In the next slide, you'll see Thomas Ball's Emancipation Group, dedicated by Frederick Douglass and Ulysses S. Grant, but with an image that rankles many people today because it shows a kneeling and subservient person of color, either kneeling or rising through the beneficence of the great emancipator. If you'll look at the next slide, you'll see the way the statue looks today from the back, fenced in, and the subject of frequent protests and discussions at its perimeter. In the next slide, you'll see a dedication for a Confederate memorial at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The dedication of a tribute to an anonymous Confederate soldier known later as Silent Sam. Records show that it was quite a racist dedication ceremony with astonishingly insensitive and brutal comments about people of color. Inevitably, the statue met the fate you'll see in the next slide. As the discussions about Silent Sam continued, eventually students decided to take the initiative and the statue is gone. As I mentioned, and you'll see in the next slide, the mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, really began this reappraisal process by removing a number of Confederate statues from that city. Now, there have been reappraisals of statues in the past. In the next slide, you'll see one of California's contributions to Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol, Thomas Starr King. Does anyone know who Thomas Starr King is? We'll take a test later. But he was removed and replaced by, we'll see in the next slide, Ronald Reagan. So there is a continuum of reappraisal. The statue controversy has come to New York in various ways. In the next slide, you'll see the latest. This is the relief sculpture of George Washington on the Washington Square Arch in downtown Manhattan. You'll see that a demonstrator has made a comment about the first president. And in our final slide, you will see the fate that has befallen a statue of Christopher Columbus, one of several Columbus statues that have been toppled or taken down officially, as in Chicago in recent weeks and months. So as we reappraise, we're going to organize today's discussion in a kind of a different way. We're going to have three separate discussions, each, as you've heard from Louise Mirror, with another authority on history and memory. And then we'll gather together as a group to take your questions. Let's lead off with Alan Guelzo, coming to us from Pennsylvania. And as we welcome Alan, good evening.
Good evening, Harold.
Now, I want to start with a question that will be obvious, I think, to those who've read your books. You've written about Gettysburg, you've taught at Gettysburg, you've lived at Gettysburg. You wrote the definitive book about the Battle of Gettysburg. And we're hearing now that at least there's an idea percolating in Congress that perhaps the Confederate memorials on the battlefield of Gettysburg where, ironically, people have said for years, maybe we should move statues to, that is, battlefield park sites. There is a move to reappraise them and perhaps remove Confederate statuary. And I'd like to start by asking you how you feel about that and why.
Well, just to clarify, what we're talking about is a House bill, H.R. 7608. I think I got the number of that right, which has passed the House at the end of July, and has been sent on to the Senate and duly referred to committee. Things sometimes are sent to committee to die, and I don't know what will be the ultimate disposal of that particular piece of legislation, but it's a very big bill, and there are, in fact, only a very small number of provisions that touch on monuments. There are 3 clauses in the bill, and what the bill provides for is the removal of Confederate monuments, markers, memorials, on any National Park Service owned property, not just Gettysburg. This would be across the boards in the United States. At Gettysburg, there's an interesting situation because Gettysburg is dotted with monuments and markers and plaques. There are, by the most accurate rendering I know, some 1,328 statues, markers, explanatory plaques. I think it even counts the number of regimental flank markers that appear on the battlefield, or at least as it's officially known, Gettysburg National Military Park. Most of them, I'd say overwhelmingly, they are connected to the Union side of the battle. From those flank markers all the way to a statue of the Irish Brigade's chaplain, Father Corby. A few of these monuments, like the Irish Brigade's Celtic cross, are really sublime in their simplicity. They really are marvelous works of art. Some of them are just weird. The one that comes most readily to mind is the 42nd New York's monument. And Harold, you're probably familiar with this one. It's the one which, although it's remembering a Union regiment, literally depicts an Indian chief and a teepee, which makes people wonder if the designers somehow got the wrong memo about the wrong war. Actually, they didn't, because the 42nd New York was recruited under the auspices of Tammany Hall, and the chief depicted on the monument is the eponymous Chief Tammany. But that's going to be a detail that probably New Yorkers are the only ones who are going to be alive to. When these monuments on the Gettysburg battlefield were dedicated, their creators imagined them as monuments. And I mean that term deliberately and literally, as monuments. In other words, these were supposed to be unquestionable testimonies to the righteousness of the Union cause. Just to pick one in particular, the 84th Pennsylvania. Its monument was dedicated on September 11th, 1889. And the man who gave the dedicatory address was Captain Thomas Merchant. And as far as he was concerned in his dedicatory address, there was no question the Union fought for what was eternally right and good. It fought against what he called the greatest of rebellions, against the greatest of governments. But that emotion was felt strongest by those who actually fought in the Civil War. Move a generation beyond that, and the direct enthusiasm that made Captain Merchant wax so eloquent over a monument had waned. The monuments mutated. They became something else. They became memorials. And so the children and the grandchildren of Merchant's fellow soldiers came to Gettysburg to view a memorial of what their forebears had done. Another 2 generations on, which is to say today, visitors to the battlefield take notice of the 84th Pennsylvania monument only as a marker of where that particular regiment fought in the Great Battle. So what you see is a metamorphosis here. From monument to memorial to marker. And by the time it became a marker, the emotional power that its dedicator strove to invest it with was simply a historical footnote. In fact, anybody knowledgeable enough would have been happy to point out that the 84th Pennsylvania didn't even fight at Gettysburg. It had been detailed to guard the Army of the Potomac's supply depot at the railhead at Westminster, Maryland. So purely on the grounds of falsehood, the 84th Pennsylvania's monument should be the first to be removed from the battlefield. But it won't be, and I would add it shouldn't be. Because today it only serves as a marker that some Pennsylvania boys in blue were at least part of the Gettysburg campaign. Time, the mutation of monument to memorial to marker, has defanged the potential implications. The implications that perhaps a statue of Joseph Stalin or of Saddam Hussein would have for us today. So time has changed these things. And when we look at monuments, what we have to understand is how the monuments have moved through this process of mutation. What then do we do as we look at the statues and plaques and whatnot on the Gettysburg battlefield and other battlefields? I think we want to ask ourselves, what is it exactly we are looking at? Are we looking at a monument, or are we looking at a memorial, or are we looking at a marker? Because all of these things have gone through this process. We don't normally think of statues as being something that goes through a process. We think of it as being solid. It's what solidly connects us to an event in the past. Actually, it's not. Markers, memorials, they change the same way we change and the same way that our perceptions change. And I think that is an important thing that has to be taken into account when we're asking about what's the rationale for a particular marker or memorial or statue. Gettysburg is I think, a test case of exactly that. And it poses, I think, a number of interesting questions that we should be asking ourselves before we rush to conclude that something is only a memorial of something which is offensive. Let's ask, where is this monument along this process of change? And Gettysburg, I think, is a place where certainly we can do that. I'm not sure that legislation is ever a good means for achieving things that require a lot of parsing. So I'm a little dubious about the legislation, but I'd be even more dubious about approaching these monuments on the Gettysburg battlefield and other battlefields and simply saying, all right, here's the easy algorithm. We know exactly what this means. Let's do something to it. That is iconoclasm. And iconoclasm is something that usually feels really good at the moment, but some period of time further on down the pike, we turn around and hit our foreheads with the palm of our hands and we say, what were we thinking? So let's look at these monuments, yes, but let's also understand the process they go through and ask ourselves what they really represent at a moment.
Does it also matter when they were installed at Gettysburg, do you think? And I'm going to push you a little bit to leave Pennsylvania and New York aside and focus on, say, Alabama. A marker that was dedicated by George Wallace in the height of his resistance to desegregation. There's wonderful film, I mean, not wonderful, but a provocative film of his dedication of that marker. Does it make a difference if something was installed in the 1880s or 1890s or by a segregationist governor of Alabama to celebrate what his boys were fighting for?
Well, I think it does, but I think it also means that what we have to do is interrogate the statues, the memorials, the monuments in a very careful fashion. Because it's very easy to say, well, this was put up in the 1880s, the 1890s. All right, that's Jim Crow, therefore this automatically means Jim Crow. Well, no, not necessarily. You have Confederate statues that go up in the 1890s because in large measure before that, nobody in the South could afford them.
That's absolutely right.
Here's a case where in the in the latter half of the 1860s, after the war is over, into the 1870s, into the 1880s, the South is about 25% behind the rest of the country in terms of economic development, because the South's taken what amounts to the equivalent of the Great Depression as its economic impact in the Civil War. It's really not until the 1880s, the 1890s, that you begin to have any opportunity, economically speaking, for people to be able to afford something like that. In fact, a lot of statues that do get put up in the South are actually funded by Northerners. Take, for instance, the famous Lee statue in Charlottesville, the one that was at the center of the 2017 riots. That was actually funded by a Northerner from Chicago. He was a transplant. He had been born in Virginia, but he'd moved to Chicago, made his fortune there, and funded the statue in the city, which his father had once been the mayor of. So you see how easily the complexities of the ties that link these statues to the past can become crossed with each other. What I would suggest.
Let me just point out that the Mercier statue in Richmond was funded by Southerners, presumably, but it was the campaign that raised the money was based around a print made in New York and sold for the benefit of the Lee and the same for the Lexington Lee statue. So, as you say, it's complicated.
Yeah, here's another example. To go back to the Lee statue in Charlottesville, this was around which that 2017 riot swirled. And yet, if you look back at the actual dedication of that statue in 1926, I think it was 26, but I'm doing this off the top of my head. If you look at how the statue was dedicated, the speaker who was delivering the dedicatory address was Maury Jones. Maury Jones was a Baptist minister from Georgia, and he got the ticket for delivering the address because his father was John William Jones, who had written 2 biographical studies of Robert E. Lee, both of them just absolutely abasing themselves in admiration of Lee. Well, Maury Jones gets the ticket to deliver the address. Jones, if you look at Jones, Jones was an enemy of the Ku Klux Klan, a critic of Jim Crow. And when he came to Charlottesville and delivered the dedication address, it was all about how this statue of Lee points the South away from its past and points the South towards its future in the spirit, as Jones put it, in the spirit of Robert E. Lee saying we have to put the war behind us, we have to put slavery behind us, we've got to face the future. All right, which Lee is it then? Which statue is it then? To whom does that statue belong in terms of connection? I think in the spirit of what you've asked about, what's the context? I think it's important that we ask a series of questions. And the questions I would pose to a statue, if we're looking at a statue which has controversy attached to it, and we're thinking about removing it, I'd say ask these questions. First of all, does the statue commemorate an individual who inflicted harms on a living person? I mean, harms that would be adjudicable in a federal court. I mean, that is what I apply, for instance, when we're talking about the Saddam Hussein statue in Baghdad or the Stalin statue in Budapest that the Hungarian revolutionaries pulled down. Did the statue commemorate someone who actually inflicted harms on living people? All right, if that's true, take the statue down, get rid of it.
And arguably, you can say that Robert E. Lee brought harm on living people. I mean, the case has been made.
Well, I'm talking about living people as literally contemporaries, as today. Is there anybody today who was harmed by Lee? That's a question you have to ask. Now, I'm not supplying the answers at this point. Just saying.
Well, I actually need to bring Edna into the conversation. We'll return to this.
Okay, that's fine.
When we get to the group. And I'd like to welcome Edna. It's a very good segue to the discussion with Professor Medford, because we're waiting for Edna to. There she is. Welcome, Edna. You grew up in the shadow of some of these monuments, literally, and I just like to get a sense of how it was for you to grow up in amidst memorials to, or monuments or markers to Confederate heroes?
Sure. Let me just start by saying what the environment was like that I grew up in. I grew up in a rural community south of Richmond, about 25 miles south of Richmond, Virginia, capital of the Confederacy. And it was a community with an 82% Black population when I was growing up. But we had control of absolutely nothing. We were not represented in terms of politics. We were not represented on the school board until very late. And when we went to the courthouse, for whatever reason, we were confronted with a Confederate monument. And the monument read, to the defenders of constitutional liberty and the right of self-government. And so we had to deal with that. And it's interesting that on that same site, the monument was actually erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy in 1900. In 1892, a Black man, father of 8, was lynched on the site. And so you have this monument to these Confederate soldiers erected there. It's an obelisk as opposed to an actual statue of a Confederate soldier. But in any case, that mattered. I mean, the suggestion was that Black people had no rights. That monument represented to us the powerlessness that we had. And then if we wanted to go shopping, because it was a rural community, so there were no stores there, but we went shopping in Richmond. And if we had to travel down Monument Avenue, we had the vision of all of these Confederate heroes there. And so it's not just the monuments themselves, but it's what they represent. It's the white supremacist attitude, it's the racism. And, you know, I agree that maybe Lee was not responsible for the suffering of Black people directly in our time, but his actions certainly produced a legacy of racism and discrimination. So I think we sometimes forget that it didn't all end with the Civil War. That racism continued and was perpetuated and was symbolized in those monuments. So it does matter to Black people. It definitely matters to African American children when you grow up and you know that your life is not valued in the same way as the life of a white child. And that's something that we learned very early on.
So, Edna, you and I have had conversations on this subject in at least 2 venues in New York and at Gettysburg. And as you know, I've kind of evolved on this issue. At a certain point, I was hoping that contextualization could preserve the art for art's sake. I've learned from you and from others, and as you probably know, I've changed my position to be more, I hope not of an iconoclast, but as someone who understands better the full weight that these statues exerted, the influence and the tragedy that they represent. But you've always been, or for years, have been for the removal of Confederate monuments, not just the ones that were in your personal experience. So I wanted to ask you, what process would you propose? Is it community by community? Is it governors? I mean, there are some state laws that forbid moving monuments created specifically to prevent reappraisal. And I'm wondering how you think the process should go forward.
Well, my objection has always been to having those monuments on public lands because they are maintained by the tax dollar. And I don't see any reason why people of color who have been most damaged by the whole legacy of slavery and the racism and discrimination that comes with it, why we should have to pay for the maintenance of those monuments. I think that every individual community has to decide for itself what it wants to do. I would not presume to tell someone in Texas what they should do with their monuments. But I certainly would hope that they would recognize that they should not have people of color paying for these monuments, for the maintenance of these monuments. What we do with them once they're down, that's for someone else to decide. But also, too, I would hope that we understand that these monuments are just a symbol of something much deeper. So I hope that we won't spend so much time talking about whether or not we should take them down or what we should do with them once they are down, and then do nothing about the racism that continues. So I'm more concerned about the inequities in terms of housing, in education, in healthcare, in employment. I want to see those kinds of changes. And so if removing those symbols of white supremacy leads us to a better America that's more inclusive, then I'm all for it. But it doesn't serve anyone if we just simply focus on removing these monuments and we do nothing else after that. And we think, oh, everything's okay now.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit to represent the community of Washington, D.C., where you've taught at Howard. So, and I wish I'd had time to ask Alan this question as well. I'm sure he can weigh in when we're in a group. But Washington, D.C. is the home of the Thomas Ball statue, as I pointed out in this little slideshow I did. A statue that was funded by free people of color, dedicated by Frederick Douglass, who was not happy with it, not completely happy with the statue from the beginning. And now there is enormous pressure to take it down. The copy of it that stood in Boston, I believe, has been removed from Boston. It's astonishing how attitudes toward this statue have changed, or how insensitive we've been. But what is your view about the Thomas Ball?
Hands off the statue. Okay. I was really shocked and a bit angered by what I was hearing about that statue. I agree that it's not ideal, that I would have preferred exactly what Frederick Douglass said at the dedication in 1876, that it would have been a more manly stance for the Black man to be sort of on the same level as Lincoln. I understand that. It's not a perfect monument, but it's a monument to freedom. And it was paid for, but primarily by people who were formerly enslaved. I think we need to make distinctions between monuments to freedom and monuments to white supremacy, or monuments to a bygone day when white Southerners were in total control of the Black population. There's a big difference there. And so the people who are pressing to remove that monument need to understand that this is a whole different thing. I don't know what's driving this. I just think that perhaps they need to be better informed, perhaps. But I'm very distressed that they think that it's okay to tear it down or move it. And I'm sort of surprised, too, that people have been so willing to accept the opinion that it needs to be removed. There are people who I think very highly of, who says, well, we can save it, we can preserve it if we just remove it. No, stand your ground. This is a memorial to freedom. It needs to stay where it is.
Thank you for that. Now I want to bring in another voice, Brent Leggs, whom Louise introduced a few minutes ago. He'll be signing on momentarily. And Brent, as you know, is known for building monuments, not necessarily recommending that they be removed. But Brent, you've had your say about Confederate monuments. I was reading a piece in Architectural Digest in which you were quoted as saying, the time has come to replace Confederate memorials with symbols that represent who we are as a culture now. So I thought I'd ask you to sort of expand on it.
Yeah, well, it's good to be with you, Harold.
Thank you, Brent.
So in that article, I was wanting to communicate the message that historic sites that bring forward a diverse and inclusive national narrative play a crucial role in facilitating the reappraisal and significance of American history. And in many ways, it helps to facilitate our contemporary understanding of ourselves. Of course, there's a side that is championing the removal of Confederate monuments. But in many ways, I feel like this conversation distracts from the real history, the value-based history. I'm advocating that we should invest in to create the same stewardship level for African-American historic places nationally. That we have an opportunity in this moment to be able to highlight the contributions and examples of Black resilience, activism, and excellence in order to tell the full story of our nation. And in many ways, this is the monument building work that is crucial to this moment. Because if we redirect our public and private investment in Black cultural heritage, then we are honoring the Black American experience over 4 centuries. And in many ways, when we begin to value African American history, we also value Black lives.
I'm not sure everyone in our audience knows about the Gaston Motel. I'd love you to just tell us a bit about it. I've heard you talk about it. It's just a remarkable project.
It really is. So the A.G. Gaston Motel, which is in Birmingham, Alabama, I think this is arguably one of the most significant civil rights landmarks in the world. So in the spring of 1963, the Birmingham campaign, known as Project C, the mass youth demonstration movement, was planned and implemented inside of Room 30, the historic Room 30 at the A.G. Gaston Motel. This is where the American Civil Rights Movement descended, occupied the motel for several months, included Dr. King, Reverend Shuttlesworth, Fred Shuttlesworth, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and others. And what I think is so beautiful about this project, when we got involved to protect it in perpetuity and to memorialize it as a national monument in honor of Birmingham's remarkable civil rights legacy, it currently had been vacant for 20 years, deteriorating this history. And we found that to be an injustice. We partnered with the city of Birmingham, local and national coalition, but most importantly, with the Black community in Birmingham to honor their contribution in creating a more just American society. And the way that I look at the Gaston story, I mean, this is the best example where Black men, women, and children who were only armed with the truth in the fight and battle against immorality, together through their collective action would test and affirm the timeless idea that purposeful collective action can change our nation and the world. The power of preservation today is not only to recognize the full contributions of African Americans to our nation, it also is an economic driver to help revitalize historic Black neighborhoods that have faced years of disinvestment. Culture and preservation, when linked together, is a contemporary form of racial justice.
Was the community in Birmingham behind these efforts to preserve the motel?
They were.
Yeah.
Yeah, it included the trustees and members of the 16th Street Baptist Church, Reverend Price, Ted Alexander, and others. It included the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. It included members from Bethel Baptist Church, which was the home church of Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, members from the Masonic Temple, 4th Avenue Business District. That's for me, it demonstrated the power of grassroots activism and the Black community to elevate and to bring memorialization and recognition to their contributions in American history. That community has been empowered by the work that they accomplished in partnership with others.
I know we've discussed the fact that you think there's a role that historical societies can play in advancing more of a rainbow preservation attitude. So I wanted to give you a chance before we turn to questions. Tell us how, because so many of the people who are on our Zoom conference today are members, active members of the New York Historical Society.
Yeah, so I have been thinking in many ways, and what I spend a lot of my free time thinking is, what are the new forms of partnership, interpretation, and community? And how can we create a bold vision for our nation and collaborative process for telling the full history with a deep focus on preserving African historic places? So I can only imagine that all of the historical societies in the United States, they steward this remarkable but often hidden collection of material culture. Is there a way that we collaborate to mine, to identify, to document, and to share publicly with scholars, researchers, preservationists that can use this material culture to interpret stories of African American activism, resilience, achievement, and beyond to tell our story? And I think this is the moment where that collaboration can really move forward our nation's understanding of itself.
Thank you. So I'd love to bring all of our panelists on so we can be together at last. And here we all are. We had one inevitable question that I'm going to start with, and let's just sort of do a lightning rounds for these questions so we can get to as many as we can. We have a question about what to do, if anything, with public memorials and statues to our founders. Edna, why don't you start, because you're on my right-hand screen, then we'll go to Al and then to Brent.
Okay. Yeah, I think we all recognize that many of the founders were slaveholders, but we should also recognize the contributions that they made to founding the nation. And so there's a big difference between what they did in terms of what they did for the nation and those folk who worked against the nation, who attempted to tear it down. And so although I cannot personally think of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson perhaps in the same light, or Madison, in the same light that someone else might, but I still believe that there has to be recognition of what they did to build the country, or to at least establish the nation.
Alan, same question.
I cannot disagree with Edna on that point. What we're dealing with when we're dealing with figures like Washington, Jefferson, Madison, we're not dealing with saints. We're dealing with the fact that there are human beings who have these flaws, sometimes terrible flaws, but the past is not full of people who are either criminals and oppressors on one side, or of righteous sisters and valiant brothers on the other. If that was the case, we wouldn't need statues. What we deal with as a problem today is that it's become almost an offense to think that anything has turned out well as a result of Jefferson and Madison and Washington. And I think that's where a lot of the questioning and a lot of the problems arise. Brent has, I think, very eloquently laid out a positive path forwards to say, let us talk about what we can do more. And Edna's made some very important distinctions, especially talking about the Ball statue, where I think she could not be more correct that way. What we are dealing with now in our own time is not easy, not obvious, and there's no convenient algorithm for dealing with it. And yet, that is what we're trying to apply to Washington, Jefferson, and Madison. And I think, once again, we have to step back and take the full equation into account. What have these people done? How do we balance it all? And how do we understand the distance between ourselves and them? I mean, I could ask the same question about, there's a bust of Aaron Burr in the Senate chamber. I mean, he was the vice president of the United States, and he did preside over the Senate. But the man also committed treason. And yet, I haven't yet heard anyone losing it over Aaron Burr as a traitor. Why not? Well, largely because it's been so long ago that nobody really cares. Maybe New Yorkers care about Aaron Burr, but for the most part, people look at that and think, Aaron Burr, who was that? And the same thing, I think, gets applied to, Thomas Dorr. There's a museum to the Dorr Rebellion in Rhode Island. Why is there a museum there? This was an act of treason. And yet, we don't really get terribly upset about it. There's even that monument, Harold, this is out in California, but there's even that monument to the Donner Party in Donner State Park. I mean, what is that? Is that encouraging cannibalism? I don't think so. Why don't we get worked up about that? Well, again, here's how monuments have changed over time. Here's how time has made this tremendous amount of difference. And probably the healthiest thing we can do is to look forward rather than backward. That may sound like a strange thing coming from a historian, but it seems to me that historians are exactly the people who have the responsibility to say to others, this is why we should be looking forward, because we are moving in new directions, and we should celebrate that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Alan said is the preservation movement in the United States is looking forward. We recognize over a century that we have preserved places associated to presidents, wealthy industrialists, plantation owners. I'm thinking of Monticello, Montpelier, Mount Vernon. So our focus today is around equitable interpretation, shining light and bringing life to the enslaved worker's story. Even trying to focus on a paradigm shift, because we understand that these landscapes, even these historic buildings, in essence, have been imbued with Black resilience and humanity, and yet these stories have been hidden for so long. So the way that we are looking to the future is to be able to tell a more complete story, and I think that's the moment. That's the way that we memorialize today and into the future, by being inclusive of the full experience at these historic places.
One of our questioners asked if we in America should consider, in a preservationist mode or preservationist frame of mind, to establishing parks that feature statues of those who perhaps have been discredited in revised history, so that the art itself can be preserved and looked at as curiosities. And of course, one of the most famous examples is in Budapest, where Stalinist era statuary of figures that are probably unrecognizable even in Budapest have been put into a park. Alan, you start this one. What do you think? If things become too contested, is there a way to save the statues for art's sake?
Possibly. The problem is we'd have so many of them, I'm not sure I'd know where we'd put them.
Yeah.
And if we put them there, is anyone really going to go and look at them? Are we going to get any virtue whatsoever out of them? I mean, there's some statues I suppose you could honestly say, and I have to honestly say this, that I'm not sure there is any virtue in them. I think there are statues that should be removed. But at the same time, I think that the process of moving towards the removal of them has to be a cautious and a careful one, if only because we don't know everything. We don't have all the information, and we don't have a monopoly of viewpoint. and trying to exercise a certain degree of humility, and in that probably is going to be healthy all the way around. I mean, some statues are simply too complicated to sort out that way. Take that St. Gaudens statue. You know this one, the one of William Tecumseh Sherman at the corner of Central Park. On the one hand, this is Sherman, the conqueror of the Confederacy, and the figure that goes before him was actually modeled on an African American. That figure of victory with the laurel that she's holding. Yet this is the same Sherman who is accused of genocide against Native Americans. This is also the same Sherman who was an unabashed racist, who allowed the Ebenezer Creek debacle to occur, and who didn't want to have any black soldiers accompanying him with his soldiers on the march to Savannah, the march to the sea. How do you untangle all of that? That is a very knotty problem, and yet there is a very famous statue right there at the corner of Central Park. What do we do about it? Where do we put it?
I kind of wish you hadn't brought it up, frankly, but that's all right.
I'm sorry, I do.
Because as no one has given any thought, it's in New York, it's known principally as the statue that Donald Trump regilded when he owned the Plaza Hotel.
Well, here you get an illustration of that, what I was saying about this movement from monument to memorial to marker. I would guess that 99 out of 100 New Yorkers who walk past it are not even entirely clear who it is.
Well, it's something of an icon, but you certainly have a point. Anyone else want to weigh in on this issue?
Yes, I'm less concerned about what happens to them once they're removed, as I am with teaching our fellow citizens why these monuments and memorials and markers are problematic to begin with. And that's becoming increasingly difficult because history education, at least, is under attack in our universities, in our public schools. And I don't know what happens when we no longer think that it's important for us to know our history. How do we move forward if we don't understand what we've done in the past? And I understand, I recognize the importance of STEM programs for the country and for the world, but there has to be historians and good history books letting our children know what the history of the country, what the past has been, and how we can make a better nation in the future.
I couldn't say it better.
Yeah.
I couldn't say it better.
Yeah, I agree with that, Edna, and I think that's why preservation has a really important role right now. So at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, we don't support the erasure of history, but when communities make a decision to remove history, that is appropriate. So I've been thinking about this idea, how can we create a landscape of justice and a space for truth-telling and reconciliation? And if there is a place that could be identified and communities will donate the statues, I'm building on your remarks earlier, that we would not invest any public money to maintain this history. In essence, building on what Pablo Picasso said, art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. And if we want to acknowledge the truth for why these pieces of art, moving from monuments to memorials to marking space and flipping injustice to justice, I think having them to stand in ruin and in their own decay, and that over time, maybe it's 100 years, we can measure our social progress as a nation by the decay of these Confederate memorials and statues. Literally, it's how we measure our social inclusion and progress.
This is the Ozymandias theory of maintaining statues, I suppose. Or for those who prefer cinematic references, the final scene of Planet of the Apes, where just the torch of the Statue of Liberty is discovered by Charlton Heston. We had an interesting question. I think this is a good way to a good final question, because if there is a national sculpture hall, it's perhaps Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol. And I pointed out that there is a tradition of states reconfiguring the two statues that each is entitled to place, either in Statuary Hall or now in the new visitor center or elsewhere. But there is always rotation. I mean, the suffragists, the 3 women in a bathtub, as it's been derisively called, have risen from the crypt of the Capitol to Statuary Hall. A Confederate general is about to be removed by Florida and replaced by Mary McLeod Bethune. So there is rotation. But there also has been a movement in Congress, and we know that Speaker Pelosi removed portraits of Confederates who served in Congress later or before. Should there be a prohibition against those who supported secession and rebellion during the Civil War? And I'm talking about Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee and others. Brent, you start this time.
I actually want to build on what you said about using this moment to fill gaps in our nation's civic identity. And I think this is the opportunity for any memorial, Confederate memorial that's been removed. Communities ought to come together and decide what history deserves the prominence of this public space. How can we honor the contributions of African American women in history and build on the Ida B. Wells and Pauli Marys and begin to tell that story? Can we use public space to honor the victims of American slavery and use that as a public space for healing and a more hopeful future? So that for me is where I hope the conversation grows, is looking at the opportunity to expand the American story in public space.
Ellen, I'm going to push you a little bit on Statuary Hall. But Brent, that was an amazing way to answer the question. I will grant you that.
I will just defer to my colleagues and let
That's
them
fine.
answer that.
Alan, Statuary Hall.
I would say, let's ask questions. Let's understand that there are things at stake here. Yes, justice, yes, equity, but also compassion and also will. And there's no true will without compassion. There's also no true compassion without will. So I would say let's push for some questions to ask. I started with one question about harms. Move to another question. Did the person in the statue order the commission of a crime defined by the International Court of Justice? Third, did the individual have a specific connection to the location of the statue? In other words, was this just somebody from a statue that you put up here and it's not really anyone who had any connection there? If they didn't have any connection to the location, no, remove it. Fourth, is a statue used as a venue for promoting treason or capital crimes? Now, the police data should be able to tell us that. And then lastly, did the individual in the statue undertake any acts to mitigate the historical harms that they did? I think if and I haven't got easy answers for any of those questions, but I think it's important that we go through a process of questioning where we have questions that we're asking and we're teasing and sometimes squeezing the answers out of these statues instead of merely pointing a finger and saying, oh yeah, that, or oh yeah, the other. It's got to be a process. It has to be a reasonable and a logical process so that at least we conform to a kind of historian's version of the Hippocratic Oath. Primum non nocere. Above all, do no harm. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind.
Edna, you're getting the final word and the final opportunity to actually address the question about Statuary Hall. Out of respect to our questioner who is not, I'll do it if you don't, but go ahead.
No, I firmly believe that since the states are being asked to send forward their hero. They should be making the decision, but the decision has to be made by all of the residents, not just by a handful of people who've always decided what was best for the entire state.
Right.
So if it's Mississippi, if it's Virginia, if it's Texas, if it's Maryland, then those folk who are resident should be making the decision. There should be full discussion of why someone should be moving forward to Capitol Hill. And I think that's the only way to go.
And I think we can be comfortable that there is a tradition out there of this rotation that is welcome and offers promise, and not a descent into wanton iconoclasm. This has been such an extraordinary discussion. I apologize if I've interrupted you and if I moved too quickly among you, but we had to do it in an hour. We could have done this for 4 hours or a seminar. Maybe we should go on the road. But I just want to end with one picture, if I may. Alan brought up iconoclasm, and I did want to end by pointing out that there is a kind of an American tradition for removing statues extemporaneously. And this is a scene from Lower Manhattan a few days after the Declaration of Independence, when it was read aloud in New York for the first time. The citizens responded by tearing down a large statue of King George III, then stomping it to bits, and ultimately using the lead from which it was made to make bullets to fight the revolution. If you want to see a surviving piece of that statue, when the New York Historical Society reopens in September, be sure to go to the 4th floor, because of course the Historical Society was able to preserve a substantial piece of that horse on view for all. Again, thank you all for engaging in this talk. We hope we can resume it soon, and we hope we can see all of you on the stage of the Historical Society one day soon. Good evening.